Things were just better back then. You've definitely heard someone say it. Maybe you've even said it yourself. Whether it's the early 2000s, the 90s, or the 80s, there's this recurring feeling that life was simpler, happier, more real. But was it actually better? There's a reason so many of us feel that way, even if the facts don't fully back it up. Psychologists call it Rosy Retrospection, a cognitive bias that makes the past seem better than it really was. It's when we recall earlier times as being better than they really were, often because we forget the mundane or difficult parts and hold on to the feelings instead. Take the former Soviet Union, for example. In the 1980s and early 90s, daily life in many parts of the USSR was incredibly difficult. There were long lines for basic goods, store shelves often sat empty, and poverty was widespread. Food, clothing, even basic medicine could be hard to come by. Yet today, many people in post-Soviet countries look back on those times with nostalgia. They remember a sense of unity, stability, and shared struggle, a time when life felt more predictable, even if it was materially harder. They miss the feeling, not the facts. We'll talk about why we fall into rosy retrospection a bit later, but for now, let's look a little closer at the times people are most nostalgic about now. The 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. Not just at how they felt, but at how they really compare to today. In the 80s and 90s, life did have a certain texture. Analog, tangible, slower. There was no constant stream of digital notifications. Your time was your own, at least more than it is now. And when we talk about cost of living, it's easy to see why some people miss that era. Housing was cheaper. A single income could often support a family, at least in much of the Western world. It wasn't a perfect economy, but for many, the numbers simply worked better. But access to information was limited. You had libraries, encyclopedias, the nightly news. If you wanted to learn something, it took effort and a lot of patience. Global issues in that time carried a different kind of weight. The Cold War, nuclear fears, and in many countries, economic instability or social unrest. Healthcare was more limited. Mental health was barely discussed. If you were struggling, you were mostly on your own. So yes, there was a kind of simplicity, but it came with trade-offs. Then came the early 2000s, the middle child of decades. Not quite as analog as the 90s, not yet as digital as today. Technology was exciting, but not overwhelming. The internet was here, but we weren't living inside it yet. You could go online, but you could still log off. Social media hadn't taken over our lives, and that made it feel like a sweet spot, connected but not consumed. The economy was shifting. Housing prices were climbing, but for many, life still felt financially manageable. And information, it was opening up. Google changed everything. Wikipedia, forums, early blogs, the gatekeepers were being bypassed. Meanwhile, global events, like 9/11 and the wars that followed, brought fear, surveillance, and a new awareness of just how connected and fragile the world really was. Healthcare improved. Mental health started to enter the mainstream conversation. It was the beginning of a more aware society, but the pressure was building, quietly, in our pockets, on our screens, and then the 2020s. On paper, life has never been more advanced. We have access to more knowledge, better medicine, more opportunities to work, learn, and create from anywhere. But despite all this progress, more and more people say they feel lost, anxious, burned out. Social media has rewired how we think, how we compare, how we connect. The line between work and rest has blurred. We're available all the time, even when we don't want to be. This tension is why so many people feel nostalgic. The past feels slower, lighter, more human. But of course, our lives before weren't exactly utopias, as we saw earlier. The 2020s aren't objectively worse across the board, but for many, especially emotionally and economically, it's harder to feel at peace, which makes the past look golden by comparison. So, why do we fall into rosy retrospection? Why does the past, even the difficult parts, start to feel so comforting with time? Turns out it's actually how our brains are wired to process memory and emotion. First, we naturally filter memories emotionally. Over time, the negative details, the stress, the boredom, the everyday frustrations start to fade. But the positive moments, the feelings of joy, connection, or purpose, those stick. We don't remember every Tuesday afternoon. We remember the birthday party, the summer trip, the way life felt. Then there's something called the peak end rule, where we judge entire periods of our lives based on just a few powerful moments, usually the emotional highs or how things ended. Even if a decade was hard overall, one great memory can color the whole era in a warm glow. And when the present feels overwhelming, fast-paced, uncertain, disconnected, the past becomes a kind of emotional refuge, a place we go to feel grounded. That contrast makes back then feel better, even if it wasn't easier. There's also a deeper reason. We use the past to make sense of who we are. Memory isn't just about facts, it's about identity. We look back not just to remember, but to understand how we got here. And in that process, we often romanticize the path. Finally, we can't ignore how culture feeds nostalgia. From politics to advertising, we're constantly shown idealized versions of the good old days. Over time, those stories become part of how we remember things, whether they were true or not. So when we think the past was better, it's not necessarily because it was, it's because we're remembering it through a softer, more forgiving lens. And that's what makes Rosy Retrospection so powerful and so misleading. Instead of chasing a version of life that no longer exists, or maybe never fully did, we can ask better questions. What would make life feel meaningful today? What can I simplify, slow down, or reclaim? Not in the past, but in this moment. Because this moment is real. And the more intentional we are with it, the more likely we'll look back one day and say, those were the good days. Not because they were perfect, but because we lived them fully. Where do you stand on all this? Is there a time in your life you wish you could go back to? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.